In this last lecture on the Bauhaus, we're going to talk about typography. For the Bauhaus, the ideal typography was sans serif. The reason for this is there's multiple reasons. The first one is that they felt that sans serif was embedded within the spirit of the machine age. And that makes sense, right? Sans serif was created during the Industrial Revolution, and so it makes sense that the Bauhaus would embrace that. They also feel that sans serif has no nationalist association, unlike black letter. However, the fact that it was not German, not that German black letter, becomes politically controversial, as you can imagine. Ultimately, though, Bauhaus graphic designers appreciate sans serif because it is clear and impersonal, and they see it as best matching photography. And so one of the other major questions we're going to talk about is how do Bauhaus graphic designers integrate typography and photography? To really talk about typography at the Bauhaus, we have to talk about Herbert Bayer. Herbert Bayer was what was called a Jungmeister. He began as a student at the Bauhaus, but then was promoted to be a member of the faculty. And so he's in his mid-20s, and he is directing a new typography and advertising workshop in Dessau. His approach to typography is deeply influenced by that same Neoplatonic theory that we talked about in De Stijl. He believes that typography should communicate across national boundaries, and he designs a typeface that he calls universal because it's produced with only the compass, T-square, and triangle, and so he felt that it could be applied universally in every situation. So let's first look at his posters. This is a poster advertising an exhibition of Kandinsky's artwork in celebration of his 60th birthday. Now when you look at this, it's actually designed to imitate the shape of the Bauhaus building in Dessau, and so you can see that there's kind of blocks similar to the way that the dormitory and then the workshop block was laid out. And everything is connected with these long stretches of type that serves both to communicate the name of the exhibition, but then also to link the information on either side. But what Bayer does here that's really interesting is he puts it on an angle, and so it gives it this kinetic, dynamic expression that makes it far more engaging than the very rigid horizontal and perpendicular lines that we saw in De Stijl. You can see here how that slight tilting of Bayer's Kandinsky poster just activates the entire thing in a manner far more dynamic than what we saw Kurt Schwitter's doing in his Merz cover. Now I love putting these next to each other because they're only 2 years apart and they use so many similar strategies, and yet Bayer's is just far more legible and understandable, whereas Schwitter's is very disruptive. This is perhaps Bayer's most famous magazine cover. It's for a journal in 1928 called Bauhaus. And what he does here is a very popular design trick from this era. So it is a photograph of the journal folded over in such a way that the photograph is both the image, the subject matter, but then it also does double duty as the masthead. So here, Bauhaus is both the subject and then also the title. So the other things on here are all elements of design that he used to produce his universal typeface. So you can see you've got this triangle, a pencil, and then these very basic geometric forms. These are the basis of the typography that he develops. So before looking at Bayer's Universal, I want us to look at Josef Albers' stencil typeface. So Albers is best known for developing the Foundations course, the 4 course, but he also dabbled in typography, and you can see that here. He is using graph paper as the basis and trying to emphasize the rationality of all these forms. Now, of course, he's not the first person to use graph paper. We saw that back with the Roman de Roy, right? Way back in the Baroque period. But what he's doing here is he's reintroducing those same principles, but instead within a sans serif typeface. And so all of these shapes can be made using a compass and a ruler. And you can see, I love putting the B and the P right on top of each other, because you can see that they're basically mirror images of each other. They use the same shapes, but by reversing it, now it looks like a lowercase p and a lowercase b. Now, some letters are more effective than others. I find the M and the N to be very disruptive, but I like the F. I don't know that the G, or the E rather, works very well. But it's kind of fun to go through and look at these closely and try and figure out where is the spot where it stops communicating, because that's definitely what Albers is trying to do as well. Now we come to Bayer's Universal. So he is he's working on this at the same time as Albers, but he comes up with a very different solution. Rather than separate shapes, these are all combinations using a compass and a ruler. And so he's tried to make this applicable to all languages. It's universal, and so he felt like there shouldn't be capital letters. Lowercase letters would work for everything. And it's supposed to be very simple and easy to produce. However, it became politically unpopular in Germany because if you've ever studied German, German capitalizes all nouns, not just proper nouns. And so the fact that there's no capital letters, it was seen as being very anti-German. The experiments at the Bauhaus resulted in developments around the continent. So many graphic designers are looking at publications coming out of the Bauhaus and trying to integrate those ideas into their own work. An example of this is the Swiss designer Jan Tischhold. He was inspired by the 1923 Bauhaus exhibition to establish a standardized set of principles that he felt could be easily grasped by printers unfamiliar with modern design. His big idea is that typography should not call attention to itself. He called this the new typography. And this quote, I think, is helpful. He says, "The essence of the new typography is clarity. This puts it into direct opposition to the old typography, whose aim was beauty, and whose clarity did not attain the high level we require today." So this is his publication, The New Typography, in which he demonstrates how to align your pages. So the two-page layouts you see here, on the left with the big red X through it, this is a centrally organized page layout with the images running down the center. Tischhold believes that asymmetry is a more engaging way to organize your page, and that aligns very well with the type of kinetic, dynamic compositions that we saw happening in Bauhaus graphic design. So on the right here, you see he recommends this for a page layout with the images asymmetrically organized on the page. Describing this, he says, "The liveliness of asymmetry is an expression of our own movement and that of modern life. This movement must not, however, degenerate into chaos." That is key, right? This is what distinguishes the new typography from Dada. Now we can say that all of this comes from Dada, it does, but what the graphic designers are trying to do is take the energy of Dada and make it more communicative. Here's another example of a page layout by Tischhold. This is Typographic News from 1925. And you can see here that he arranges this once again asymmetrically with this red line here and then this one on the left side. And it should remind you a lot of the Bauhaus exhibition catalog by Moholy-Nagy. Because it recreates those corners in the same way. However, instead of everything being centered, it has this really kinetic, dynamic axis going diagonally across the space. The last thing I want to show you is this poster for movie called The Woman Without a Name, Part 2. This is a great example of integrating typography and photography. And you can see here Tischl being deeply influenced by the Bauhaus, because if you look at these shapes, it should remind you of the cones and the cylinders and the circles that, that Bayer uses on the cover of his journal. And so what Tischl does is he uses these lines to organize stills from the film, and then this leading towards a train that goes off along a different axis, and then we have the main character here wearing a cone on her head imitating this shape. And so you see this incredible rhyming between photography and then the lines on the page, which is then duplicated above by the title coming out in that same conical shape.